I've been fascinated with mazes for a long time. I love mazes for many reasons. One of the main ones is that they're both complex and simple at the same time. The form of a maze itself can look complex, but the rules for how to go about solving it are simple. Don't walk through walls, so to speak. Or in the case of a map of a maze, don't have your finger or your pen cross lines as you try to solve it. One of the other reasons why I like mazes is their potential for metaphor. This has been explored a good amount in fiction, but I believe there's much more that can be done with the metaphorical power of mazes. Specifically, I'm interested in how mazes can evoke the feeling of creation, the experience of starting with an inspiration, developing a vision, and going through the journey of making that vision become real, hopefully. Recently, I became inspired by a book by Arthur Koestler, The Act of Creation. In that book, Koestler looks at patterns that connect all creative acts, ranging from humor to science to art, and he examines what he believes is a common structure across all creative acts. In particular, I was drawn to Kessler's discussion of Gutenberg's invention of the printing press. I was so inspired by that story that I set out to create a maze that would represent the journey that Gutenberg went through, starting with the origin of his vision all the way through the invention of the printing press. And I wanted to create this video to explain how, through the medium of a maze, this is possible. To explain how this maze works, I'm going to start by zooming in on the inner region. So you'll see that in the beginning, the vision of the maze was Gutenberg's idea that he could print copies of the Bible. Apparently, Gutenberg encountered a method for printing playing cards, which you would start with an engraving of a piece of wood that would map what you would want to see in the playing card. You would rub it with ink, and then you would rub that piece of wood against a piece of paper, and that is how you would make a playing card. Gutenberg, from that technique, had the inspiration, wow, what if I could print copies of the Bible using a similar technique? But that method itself could not be applied to creating copies of the Bible because it was way too manual. The Bible is thousands of pages. You would have to create a separate wood engraving for each page of the Bible, which would be way too laborious. It would not be scalable. But yet, it gave Gutenberg the feeling that such an endeavor would be at the very least possible, that there should be a way to do it. So this is indicative of how the creative process often starts, where you have an intuition that a problem or a goal is attainable. You see where it is on a map, so to speak, but the path to getting there, the strategy, the tactics are unclear. So when you're trying to make a vision real, in the beginning, it may be hard to tell whether a solution might be easy to find or whether it'll take you years to find the solution. And commonly, what the inventor or the creator will do is simply start exploring the paths that are in front of them for trying to make their vision come true. And of course, a maze is a good metaphor for that feeling of starting from, an inspiration and coming to various choices that you make and trying to make that inspiration real. And in the language of a maze, making inspiration real means traveling from start and trying to reach the end. So here I go, I'm trying to solve the maze by following my intuition. From visually looking at this maze, it looks like I might be able to reach the end within this inner region. The inner region is a metaphor for the original scope of the problem space, where you had the idea based on playing cards to print the Bibles, and now I'm going to try to apply similar tools to try to print copies of the Bible. So I'm just going to see how far I can get by staying within this inner region of the maze. So now we're looking at the same maze where we've zoomed into the inner region of the larger maze, but I've added some color that shows that what looked like one inner region on the surface around this whole area within this boundary is actually two different shapes that do not have a passageway connecting them. So there's actually a clear barrier between this area, which contains the end, and this area that contains the beginning. This represents an early state in the creative process where you become blocked. You have a vision that is clear, you know where you want to get, but you do not have the tools or the concepts to make that vision come true. You're basically blocked, you're in a rut. So when you become convinced that there is no solution to reaching your creative vision, given what's currently inside your head, the only option in front of you is to allow for new ideas to enter the picture. And in the metaphor of the maze, this means expanding the scope of the problem space. So now we're going to zoom out again to the larger maze. And the bad news is that when looking at this larger maze, it looks overwhelming. But the good news is that the possibility of reaching a solution is now there again. And we don't really know how to do it yet, but it feels like there could be a way to do it. And we see these labels in other regions: swimming, shoemaking, farming, coin making, cooking. Each of these, and the wine harvest, each of these are areas where Gutenberg could potentially draw inspiration for making an invention, the printing press, which would ultimately lead to his ability to achieve his vision, which is to print copies of the Bible. So instead of, again, starting in the beginning and trying to wind our way through the maze and hope that we serendipitously reach the end, we're going to look at the overall structure of this maze. So again, the way that we can see the overall structure of the maze is to use color, where we break the overall maze form into smaller shapes that comprise the maze. So we already saw that this inner region was comprised of two different shapes, one containing the start and one containing the end. Again, the start represents Gutenberg's original vision, or the inspiration for his original vision, which was that technique of printing playing cards. The end represents achieving the vision of printing copies of the Bible at scale. So when we look at the overall structure of the maze, we see that the only way into the end is through this other region, which is labeled invention. We know that the current techniques available to Gutenberg are not sufficient for printing copies of the Bible at scale. So we need to invent something new, which we know is going to be the printing press. But of course, Gutenberg doesn't know that at the time. So we know we have to get through this invention region. And if we look at the blue, which represents kind of regions that we know lead to the end, we can see that it's connected to this side of the maze, which is labeled stimulus. And these are different areas where Gutenberg can potentially receive inspiration, which are swimming, shoemaking, farming, coin making, and cooking. And for now, I'm going to leave wine harvest alone for a reason I'm going to explain later. Well, actually, I'm going to explain that right now, which is wine harvest is not actually connected to the start of the maze. But we can see that these regions in yellow, cooking, coin making, farming, shoemaking, and swimming, are all connected to the start. So it seems pretty clear from looking at this overall structure of the maze that the path through is going to be through one of these yellow regions. And in the language of the maze, or in the way that I've color-coded this maze, the yellow regions represent regions that may or may not be on the path of success. The green region is areas that we know are connected to the start, and the blue regions are regions that we know are connected to the end. So the next question we have is, which of these yellow regions is on the path to victory, which again is the achieving of the vision. So let's say Gutenberg, to become unblocked in his creative puzzle of how can you produce copies of the Bible at scale, looked for inspiration in a domain like farming. So we're going to zoom in on the portion of the map that represents farming. And interestingly, we don't necessarily at this point need to prove that there's a path between start and farming. You can almost allow yourself to get lost in this maze within a maze, and we can just look at, is there a way to even get through this farming sub-maze? And let's see if there is. I'm going to take my pen and see if I can solve the sub-maze. And again, this is meant to evoke the creative process where counterintuitively, sometimes you need to let go of the puzzle that you're obsessed with solving to solve that puzzle and allow yourself to get immersed in other worlds. And the inspiration for how to solve a problem can come from surprising places. So I'm going to try to work my way through, and unfortunately here I've found a dead end. So again, if we forget our quest and of just finding the way through by somewhat randomly picking passageways in a maze and look at the overall structure of the maze, we see that this region is blocked in a similar way that we found that our inner region of the maze was blocked. In the context of this problem space, we know that farming is not the way through to solve the puzzle. Again, we're creatively blocked if we're trying to draw inspiration from farming as a way of creating the printing press. And if we were to zoom out in the maze and look at all of the different candidate regions that may lead to our invention or lead Gutenberg to the invention, we see that cooking, farming, shoemaking, and swimming are all blocked. And by the way, I did not get those other domains as examples from Gutenberg's real life. These were tended to be examples of other places where Gutenberg could have potentially drawn inspiration. However, if we see that coin making is not necessarily blocked. So now we've zoomed in on coin making, and coin making was part of Gutenberg's story. He observed a technique for making coins that would involve taking a rod steel that would imprint individual letters and symbols into coins. So instead of, in the case of playing cards, you would have to create a piece of wood that had an engraving for the complete set of what you wanted to print. In coins, he saw what he realized was movable type, where you could create symbols and then reuse them. So this was a key element of what would ultimately become the printing press, is that instead of having to create a different full version of each page as a unique object for printing, you could create a different way of printing each individual letter or symbol and then configure them to create the page that you're trying to print, which would make printing way more scalable than it otherwise was. So in the language of the maze, the inspiration that Gutenberg received through coin making can be represented as the fact that this portion of the maze is solvable. If I take my pen and I try to find a path from beginning to end, let's see if I can do it. Again, if you're Gutenberg, you don't know whether this direction is going to lead anywhere or not. Just as farming led nowhere, coin making could as well. But in this case, it looks like there is a way through. And this complete path is the visual metaphor in maze terms for inspiration. Coin making looks as if it's part of the overall puzzle of how Gutenberg will invent the printing press. So now that we know that coin making is a key connection point in Gutenberg's journey to creating the printing press, we can see in the language of the maze's color coding that coin making is now green, which means that we know it's connected to the start. And we know that this is our way to make progress against our invention. So the next question becomes, can we find a path through now that we've had this inspiration of movable type? Will that be sufficient in unblocking us and allowing us to get all the way from our original inspiration to the end? So to answer this question, we again can look at the overall shape of the maze, and we can see that, well, it looked hopeful that we would have a way through to get from this inspiration of coin making to achieve our vision. It is still blocked. In the real life case of Gutenberg, while movable type was a key breakthrough, that coin making method by itself was too messy. You couldn't individually ram a rod into a piece of paper and create a clean looking page of text for the Bible. So once again, we are still blocked and we must look for inspiration. And however, it's worth noting that while in a maze, it may take a while to discover that you're actually blocked in a micro environment of a maze. And the same would happen in the creative process, where Gutenberg may have spent hours or days or months, or I'm not actually sure how long, at that state, feeling like, okay, now I know enough to be able to solve this problem. So it may not be clear when you need more inspiration, or when you can bang your head against the same problem in the same terms and eventually find a solution. So in Gutenberg's case, he was trying to break through on how he could print copies of the Bible. And his ultimate breakthrough came from what seems like a very unexpected place, where he was participating in the wine harvest. And he was not doing that specifically so he could achieve his mission. He was doing that for fun. And in the wine harvest, he observed a method for creating wine, which is called the wine press. And the wine press was a way of creating wine by taking a very flat surface and cranking it down and putting pressure over the grapes to squeeze the juices from the grapes. And it was that method which was the missing piece of the puzzle for Gutenberg and his invention of the printing press, where instead of on a one-off basis jamming rods of steel into the book to create each page based on movable type, you could take one surface and apply pressure all at once and create a clean page. And from here, he was able to create the printing press. And we can see in the language of the maze that there's a continuous green path that connects start and end, where we started at the inspiration, which is a method for printing playing cards. We found inspiration in the method for coin making. That was a key element of movable type, but itself it wasn't sufficient for becoming unblocked. So then in the wine harvest, we discovered the wine press, which gave us the missing element of our invention. And then from there, Gutenberg invented the printing press, and then his vision was realized. And I won't deprive you the full fun of trying to solve this maze on your own. You can print out a copy and see if you can, now that I've made it way easier for you, find the start to finish.